Okay, I think we could just start with the introductions now, and we'll get into the questions. And again, people are still joining, so we'll kind of go slow in the beginning so that everyone has a chance to catch up. We have hundreds of people who signed up for this webinar, and I think Nicole, Dr. Beurkens, and I were talking just before, and it's not only a testament to the popularity and the knowledge of Dr. Beurkens, and people want to know really what's happening. And, we started this in Michigan, and people from around the country have actually signed up. But it's also, I think, very revealing that people are very concerned about youth vaping and, want to find out from one of our close experts, really what's happening and how to help your children. So this is one of our special Ask the Expert series. We do these quite regularly, about 4 times a year, and it's always such a pleasure for us to work with experts from around the country. We have experts who are pulmonologists, who are addiction psychiatrists, who are psychologists, and every expert has their own take on the situation, and I think it's really helpful for people to hear what everyone is experiencing now. So today we have Dr. Nicole Beurkens, and I'm going to start our slideshow. I'll just go very quickly about who PAVe is. We are a national advocacy and education nonprofit. We are powered by parent volunteers around the country, and we like to say we came to the table to fight the predatory behavior of the vaping companies. We discovered that Juul had come into our son's school in 2018 under the guise of an anti-addiction talk and without the school's knowledge, and told the kids, once the teachers had left the room, as is common in these anti-addiction talks, told the kids that although they did not want the kids as customers, Juul was, quote, totally safe and about to get FDA approval. None of that is true, even to this day. We've spoken with legislators around the country, and they say, hey, I heard the same thing. Juul came into my office. So this is something that they were doing quite regularly in 2018. We are approaching our 5-year anniversary this September. And, we've grown dramatically. We are the only parent voice on the ground. And as I started to say, we came to the table to fight the predatory behavior of the vaping companies, but we stayed because we realized that, the tobacco companies have used these predatory practices for years. And, we stayed at the table to advocate against the sale of all flavored tobacco. Our focus is kids and flavored tobacco. The rest, others can worry about. And today, as I said, we have Dr. Beurkens, and I'm going to put her slide on, and I'm going to let Dr. Beurkens introduce herself. She has so many amazing, she's had such an amazing career over 25 years, amazing popularity, amazing social media, a wonderful book, and I'm going to let Dr. Beurkens talk about herself.
Thanks, Dorian. Such a pleasure to be here with all of you. My background is in several different areas. I actually started out as a teacher, so I have background in my first career as an educator, working with all the way from elementary kids up through secondary, high school age kids. So I have experience in the schools with children and families, and then became a clinical psychologist mainly because I wanted to be able to work with families around the issues that they were dealing with outside of school. So I've been a licensed clinical psychologist at the doctoral level for many years now, have been in private practice for most of those years, and have done some hospital-based in Children's Hospital, our local children's hospital here, dealing with kids with chronic health conditions throughout all the specialty clinics. In my private practice, we do evaluation and treatment of kids through young adults with a wide variety of developmental and mental health concerns. And unfortunately, have seen vaping come on the scene in the last several years as yet another big issue that kids and families are dealing with. So I run my practice and see patients and supervise treatment, as well as now spending a good portion of my time doing consulting, advocacy, educational kinds of work around mental health and children, both in this country as well as globally. I think the pandemic really put a spotlight on how much we need to be paying attention to and addressing mental health for our kids and for adults, for all of us. So I'm glad to be part of that global conversation that's happening. And then I think it's important to note that on the parent side of things, I have been a parent for almost 24 years. My kids are now ages 16 through 23. I have 4 kids, 3 sons and a daughter. So this isn't just what I do professionally. The things that I talk with parents about isn't just through the lens of clinical expertise. It's also through the lens of living life with kids throughout all of these developmental stages and experiencing firsthand on the family and parenting side of things, navigating these areas with kids. So I think that's important to know as well.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned mental health and kids' mental health, and after the pandemic, just recently, the Surgeon General and the CDC have really declared kids' mental health a national, epidemic almost. And we have these colliding crises. It's youth vaping and it's kids' mental health, and each one exacerbates the other. It's chicken and egg, they both really affect each other. So we'll get into that in the questions. And I think it's, I wanted to show everyone, we had done a podcast when we first met Dr. Beurkens, probably about a year and a half ago. We were talking about kids and vaping. And this was something that had, Dr. Beurkens was starting to see, or had been seeing quite often in her practice, as she just said, and we have a really great conversation. So it's on our website. Here's a little QR code if you want to just scan it and save it for later, because it also gives some really great information and some really great tips on, how to spot that your teen is vaping and how to help your teen quit vaping. So I think let's just dive right in. Send questions to the Q&A code and button rather, and we will get into it right now. I always like to just put this slide on just to begin, because Dr. Beurkens will get into it much more deeply, but these are known harms to youth. And we talk about vaping. It's relatively new. It's only been around since about 2015. This new technology that was really patented by Juul, this nicotine delivery system, and it affects the brain, the lungs, the heart, and has so many additional effects. I know Dr. Beurkens is going to get into the effect on the brain very soon, because it is extremely detrimental. No amount of nicotine is safe for the developing adolescent brain. And I think that's something that we repeat over and over and over. And this is about kids. But your lungs, again, these products are very new, so we don't really know what the long-term longitudinal effects are. They have just come out. In the grand scheme of things, we need to really have a decade or more to really understand how that's going to affect kids' lungs. But what we do see is that kids are having extreme reactions. There was the unexplained lung illnesses of a few years ago. Well, guess what? They're still continuing, and they are being tracked by the medical world, and the insurance companies have a code. In 2022, there were almost 32,000 cases of lung illnesses. Now, that combines lung illnesses due to nicotine and lung illnesses due to THC. So it's a combination, but 75% of those people who are affected were under the age of 34. So this is really something that's affecting our youth, and then nicotine is a stimulant. It really affects the heart. And then additional dangers is a weakened immune system. We hear about seizures. The gastrointestinal effects are really shocking, extreme weight loss and nausea and diarrhea and vomiting, and it can create pre-diabetes and then negative impact on the microbiome of the mouth. So anyway, I just go through that very quickly because I think it's really important to understand. And we are going to go right in and ask Dr. Beurkens, as a child psychologist, what concerns you the most about youth vaping?
It's such a great question to kick this off. And there's two things that I want to start with here. And one dovetails nicely with the slide that you just were showing and talking about, which is one of the things that concerns me the most with this is how much we don't yet know. And what we do know at this point is scary. What we do know at this point, what's coming out more and more in the research, what we're seeing anecdotally in practice is highly concerning from a mental and physical health standpoint for children and youth. And that's just the tip of the iceberg, because essentially everyone using these devices, everyone who has been vaping since this really, started to become a more common thing, is a large group of guinea pigs, meaning we don't yet know, or we're not even close to fully understanding the full potential of risk, physically, mentally, short-term, long-term. And so that is very concerning to me, the number of children, younger and younger, but kids and young adults who really are part of this massive experiment of figuring out what are the real short and long-term dangers and damage here. And that's very concerning. And I think that can't be understated. Parents need to, and any adult working with children needs to really understand that we actually know very little. And that's the nature of how these things work, at least in the US. It's sort of things can come to market and become used in the general population, and then we collect the data and worry about it after. And I think sometimes parents or people think that if something is available on store shelves, that means that it's been deemed, at least not a major health hazard or something like that. And the reality is we actually, in many cases, with not only the devices themselves, but also the liquids and things that are being used in them, we actually don't even fully have good information on what chemicals are contained in these. We actually don't have the full picture of what people are being exposed to. But again, the little bit that we know at this point is highly concerning. So that's a big concern to me. But the second piece that is highly concerning about youth vaping is that these devices, these substances, are being targeted towards children, and specifically preteens through young adults. So let's just say, for the sake of this discussion, somewhere about 12, 13 years old through, early 20s. That's the target. And what is so problematic about that is that targeting intersects with a developmental stage of life where kids and young adults are primed for being more vulnerable to this type of marketing, to this type of peer pressure, to this type of behavior. And so, any of us who have raised preteens through young adults, or if you've taught them or worked with them in any way, they're doing a lot of not so what we might call wise, thoughtful, or smart things at these ages. That's the developmental stage they're in. That's to be expected. The problem is when we combine that developmental stage of being highly suggestible, of being much more likely to care about what peers and other people think, to succumb to peer pressure, to try risky things. That's what people in that developmental stage do, what kids do. But when you combine that with now the access and the targeted marketing of these substances and these devices, what we have is a collision of those things that makes children and young adults highly, highly susceptible to this. And the biggest piece of it is these things are more addicting than the cigarettes that we were exposed to when we were kids and young adults, right? These things are so highly addicting so quickly that kids can make impulsive decisions based on the developmental stage that they're in of being a teen or a young adult. And they don't really have the benefit of any time or space to learn from that and recalibrate that decision before they already discover that they, without any intention to do this, have become addicted. And
Right.
that is so concerning, and something that my colleagues and I are seeing in practice over and over again right now is preteens, teens, young adults breaking down in our office around how they are so ashamed, so scared, so devastated that they made a stupid decision, one that many of us have made stupid decisions when we were those ages, right? But they made a stupid decision, an unwise and impulsive decision to follow the crowd, to start vaping, and now they can't get out of it. And they're scared. And that is one of the most concerning things, and something that I think we all need to be aware of. Is just how addictive these things are, how quickly, and what a struggle it is for kids to backpedal when they make impulsive decisions around this.
Right. So there, you said so many amazing things in that, and there's so much to unpack in how you just described it. I wanted to say just a couple of things. These products have come to market, but most of them are actually not regulated. And I mean, they are pouring into our country from China. The Elf bar, the Air bars, those products are not currently regulated by FDA. They are not even playing by the rules. Most of them have not submitted applications to FDA. So we already don't know what's in the products, but then you have these unregulated products coming from China. They could have lead in them. They could have more nicotine than stated. They could have other drugs. And I mean, the problem is we don't really know.
Right.
And then you talk about peer pressure. And that's one of the questions that we'll get into later, because kids are really susceptible to peer pressure. And whether it's their peers or whether it's social media, TikTok, we see these products being pushed on TikTok. We see these products being sold now. Yep. On TikTok. DM me and I'll sell it, and I'll sell it to you. They're being sent through the mail. So it's the perfect storm, and parents are really out of the loop. We just don't know what's going on. So you mentioned this, and I think this is something that's really important to delve into, because this patented nicotine salt formulation is a very special kind of nicotine, and it hits the brain faster. There's no portion control, so you're not putting out a cigarette the way you would. These kids are sucking on these products all day long, and is one better than the other? I'm going to let you answer that as I go to the next slide, which has some information on that, but please.
It is our current understanding, and anecdotally what I see in practice, that vaping is certainly more addictive than cigarettes in two ways. The habit itself is more addictive, and the substances in the devices are more addictive. It's two components to that. So yes, and I forget what the second part of is one better than another.
One better than the other. And
just bust that myth, because I think this is something, and this is messaging even that's coming from some adults. And I have sometimes parents in my practice who will say, well, but I heard that vaping is used as a safer alternative to smoking, and they're using it to help people stop smoking. Listen, when it comes to children and young adults, neither is safe. It's not a matter of, well, I'd rather have you vaping than smoking cigarettes. Both have significant problems. And when it comes to vaping, we are seeing more problems more severely and earlier on than historically we have seen with cigarettes. But I think that is sort of a red herring, that the idea of, well, let's argue about which one is safer or better. They're both bad. And we need to really be putting them in the category, just like we've had, anti-tobacco, anti-smoking campaigns for years in this country that have dramatically dropped, the amount of people who smoke cigarettes. We need that same kind of attitude and messaging around vaping as well. Vaping is not a safe alternative.
Exactly. And I think the vapes, again, the unregulated vapes are coming in all different flavors. And that's one of the main differences. Cigarettes, you have menthol, which already is a travesty, because the mentholated part, the menthol, will make the poison go down smoother. It opens the lung passages. It lets the nicotine go deeper. Most of these products now, most of these vaping products are iced. So they're flavored, they're blueberry ice, they're iced lemonade, they're, you know, they smell amazing. Kids in the bathroom, it smells amazing, but they're iced, which makes it easier to inhale and easier to go down. So that's definitely,
I
really-
want to make one more comment too, because sometimes when we talk about this safer question or just this issue around vaping, both kids and parents will say, but what if there's no nicotine or THC or whatever in the vape? What if it's just, you know, fruit flavored vape liquid? And what we need to all get on the same page about is that inhaling anything from these devices directly into the lungs is dangerous and problematic, whether or not it has an addictive substance in it.
Right.
So kids can get addicted to the process, the habit of using them, but also this can cause significant damage physiologically, just the action of inhaling these chemicals and these things into the lungs. Our lungs are not meant for that. Guess what our lungs are meant for? Breathing air,
right.
taking air into them, not a mixture of chemicals and flavorings and who knows what. So I think that's an important thing, because kids will often deflect with that. Well, you don't understand. You know, no, I'm not actually, there's no nicotine in the vape juice,
It's
you know, that I use.
Or it's just lavender. You
That's
also
right.
have the high heat. So
Yes.
one of
Yes.
the things you mentioned earlier, that you don't know what's in these products, even if you have a list of the chemicals, once you burn them at high heat and you combine them, they end up forming a third chemical or a different chemical. And then very often, because these products aren't regulated, and I wouldn't even get into the lithium battery issue, because those lithium batteries, not only are they horrible for the environment, but they can explode, they can heat up really quickly, and they can scald your lungs. So you have all sorts of issues. And until someone takes a stand, regulates these products, and, you know, protects our children from the products coming in from China, we are really going to be having some issues. So I think this question is interesting, because it's asking what types of interventions are most effective for preventing.
Yes.
This is not afterwards, we're going to get into the quitting, but for preventing. You know, how early do you talk to your kids? What do you say to them? I mean, how do you address this issue? Because some parents are worried, well, I don't want to talk about it because then they'll know about it. And if they know about it, they might want to do it. And so you have that really, you know, you have that pull. Well, if they don't know about it, they're not going to know it's dangerous. But how do you counsel your patients and your parents?
It's a great question. And boy, we could spend an entire hour just on this, right? So let me delve into this briefly. First of all, I think you're so right that across many, perhaps what we would categorize as uncomfortable topics and issues in parenting, a lot of us fall into the trap of exactly what you just said, that, well, I don't want to bring it up, I don't want to put it on their radar, then they'll want to do it. And what I have found both personally and professionally across 25 years of working with kids and being a parent is, it is almost never the case that kids aren't already aware of some of the things that we're thinking about, talking with them about. And especially now in a world where they are on the computer most of the day at school, they have smartphones, they are riding the school bus, they are out there in the world. Chances are, if it's on your radar that your child might be old enough to start talking about or thinking about an issue, they probably have already been exposed in some way, shape, or form. And so we want to obviously talk about this in a developmentally appropriate way. The way we talk about any topic with, let's say, an 8-year-old is going to be vastly different than an 18-year-old. But a good way to open the conversation is to just ask what they know or have heard, or to make a comment like, oh, you know, I saw this story on the news, or I read, you know, I saw this thing on Instagram or whatever. And have you seen anything with that? Or what do you know about that?
Yeah.
And that helps you gauge by your child's response perhaps whether they are aware of it or not, what they might have been exposed to, and you can take it from there. But I think just as we would start talking with elementary age children about basic health risks, about taking care of their bodies, about not doing drugs, about getting enough sleep, about moving their body. This is part of that conversation. This falls in the category of substance use, of what are safe and what are harmful things that we can do to our body. And that kind of opens up the conversation. And then obviously you take it from there. And as far as interventions that are effective for preventing, education is a key part of that. Helping kids to understand the risks. Now, that's not in itself sufficient. And unfortunately, I think where we tend to go wrong with substance use prevention programs or strategies in general is we think that, well, if we have done a good job of giving kids the facts and educating them about the dangers and those kinds of things, then we've done our job here.
Yeah.
But this raises a really important second part of prevention that I think doesn't get talked about enough. And this applies whether we're talking about vaping or we're talking about drug use or alcohol use, or we're talking about anything that falls in the realm of addictive kinds of behavior. And that is that there's a reason on a social, emotional level why kids and adults start to go down the path of unhealthy behavior or substance use. And so it's not enough to just educate our kids on vaping's dangerous, here's what it can do to your lungs. I mean, there's lots of effective information and even programs online and in schools now showing kids pictures of lungs, like giving them good data and facts about what vaping can do to you and why it's dangerous. But we know that that isn't enough. And so what we need to be talking with kids openly about are things like coping and stress reduction, are things like how to navigate relationships with peers in healthy ways. What other supports and things can we do to help ourselves when we're not feeling like we're in a good mood or we can't focus or we're having stress and anxiety? Who are the support people we can reach out to? And putting supports in place in our homes, schools, and communities that help youth with that stuff. That is an essential part of preventing, because what's the number one thing that vaping or any kind of substance use behavior is doing? It's a coping strategy. They're trying to cope with something that's not feeling good to them or that is not going well in their lives. Educating them and giving them facts alone isn't going to inoculate them from using substances or trying vaping if we aren't also addressing and helping them understand and providing support and giving them other tools to address the social emotional pieces. So I think that all of that together is what's really critical for prevention.
I think, that's so important because, we like to tell our parents, you have to speak with your child early, but often. And, as they get older, they take in information in a different way. And so you have to really tailor what you're saying to what stage they're in. And the earlier you start to talk to your kids, the more comfortable they'll be coming to you later on. And I think that addresses exactly what you said when they're dealing with stress, when they're dealing with peer pressure. If you haven't started those conversations early enough, they're going to feel awkward or they're going to feel scared to come and talk to you. And that is really the most important thing that you have. And every family is different. And I don't want to say, that it's easy for every family. Some children, some parents just go through a really difficult time and it is so hard. And no matter what you say to your child, sometimes there's just no communicating with them. So everyone has a different situation, but I love those suggestions. I think those are great. And a lot of that actually addresses this next question, which is if a student is caught in vaping in a school,
Mhm.
how can the administrators best support the students? Now, we like to say, it doesn't mean that there are no consequences if a child is caught, but very often, someone once, actually, it was might have been the Prime Minister of Australia who said these kids were marketed to, how can you be upset at them that they actually, that they actually took the bait and that they're actually using these products because they were marketed to? So how can administrators support students?
Yeah, this goes really well with, the last, what I was saying for the last question, because look, using these substances, vaping doesn't happen because there aren't enough punishments or consequences in place, right? If that was the case, kids wouldn't do it. If that was the case, humans wouldn't do most of the unhealthy or dangerous things we do, right? The fact is, kids know that there are punishments and consequences. That's not enough. So to your point, yes, there need to be rules, there need to be expectations, there need to be consequences, but that alone doesn't solve this. And especially when we look at the addictive nature of this, we don't say to an adult addict coming into a treatment facility, well, the way that we're going to get you out of this addiction is just to give you harsher punishments in your life or to make your life harder, right? We recognize that this started as a way of coping, that this now has become chemical dependence. This is a person who does not have the tools and the supports to figure out how to not do this. And so we need to surround them with support and empathy and education and tools. Mm-hmm. So what I'm seeing happening, and unfortunately this happens in a lot of schools with anything that's quote unquote against the rules, the focus, at least in American schools, has very often been on punishment and consequences, things like suspension or expulsion or involving law enforcement, or saying, you can't participate in, any of the special activities or whatever. What's important to understand about that is for many kids, what that's doing now is cutting them off from the very people and sources of support that could help them in the process of working through this problem. Right. Just having, punitive kinds of efforts doesn't do it. So what we want to do is be sitting down when it comes to a school's attention that a student is engaging in this behavior. We need to meet that with empathy. Wow, this is not what you expected to have happen.
Right. Your point about becoming addicted so quickly. Right.
That's right. And to acknowledge that, wow, you're a good kid, because guess what? In 25 years, I've never met a bad kid. You're a great kid who's gotten caught up in something that I think has gotten away from you, and you're probably feeling scared and you don't know what to do. And let's get your parents in here and let's help make a plan. If there are things that are contributing to it, as there often are, a sense of very high pressure or stress in the school environment or outside of school, what can we do in and outside of school to support you with that? Whether that's maybe giving you some supports within school or getting you into counseling or therapy outside of school. Can we connect you and your family to some resources? Let's provide some education to you and your parents. Let's connect you with the resources and get the supports in place that are going to allow you to actually overcome this problem and not just punish you so that you stop doing it on school grounds, because that tends to be what happens. Is the punishments may help a kid be more savvy or not do it during the school day, or quite honestly, they're still doing it. They're just being a lot more careful and sneaky about it. Right. But it doesn't help with the real issue, which is we want to help kids overcome this addiction and move into adulthood free from this in their lives.
Exactly. We also talk about alternatives to suspension because, for one mistake, you should not suspend or, expel a child. And that's isolating. So if you're kicking them out of school, then all of a sudden they're isolated. And then all of a sudden, that behavior will continue and sometimes become elevated. So those are great. Those are great suggestions. We spoke briefly about mental health, and I think I'd love to really talk about the relationship between vaping, because I think kids use vaping to alleviate stressors, but then it causes even more. So I'd love you to go into that, because I'm sure that's something you see all the time.
Yeah, and we can talk about even the neurochemistry briefly of why this happens. There's definitely an interconnectedness between mental health symptoms, diagnoses, challenges in youth and vaping, for sure. And as you mentioned at the outset of our conversation, that becomes a cycle, a chicken and an egg kind of thing. And ultimately, it doesn't matter which comes first. You know, we can argue in the research literature about whether the mental health things come first and the vaping comes next, or the vaping comes first and the mental health things come next. I've seen it go both ways, and ultimately, it doesn't matter.
And it's the anxiety and the depression.
That's right. That's right. Kids who have a history of things like anxiety, depression, ADHD, mood instability, behavioral challenges tend to be more prone to starting behaviors like vaping and other addictive kinds of behaviors. But it is certainly also the case that kids who don't have a history of things like anxiety, depression, ADHD, other types of things, as they start vaping and start exposing their brain to these substances, develop these kinds of symptoms. So it's both. And ultimately, what we need to understand is that they feed each other. And we need to be addressing things like vaping through the lens of mental health. Mental health is a broad category. I think people tend to think of this as, diagnoses. Oh, my kid isn't diagnosed with anything, so mental health is an issue. Mental health is something for all of us. We all exist on a continuum of mental and physical health. Sometimes we may be healthier than other times, but mental health isn't something that some people deal with and the rest of us don't. Mental health is something that is there for all of us all the time. And when kids are vaping, what that's telling us is something is not going well from a mental health perspective. Maybe it's that they are feeling overwhelmed, stressed, anxious. Maybe it's that they're feeling sad, down, or even what would constitute depression. Maybe they're feeling like they can't concentrate. Maybe it's mental health issues around relationships. They're feeling lonely.
Yeah, I just wanted to pause you there, because it's you talked about the neurochemical reaction. So tell us what the nicotine and what that does to the brain to alleviate those symptoms, because you mentioned everything that kids are feeling, but then why are they vaping?
That's right. And this is one of the most counterintuitive things that I think is confusing for kids and adults, because if we're talking about vaping nicotine, and we could talk about THC, weed, other things, but let's talk about nicotine because that's the most prevalent. Nicotine is classified as a stimulant. Meaning, as one of the slides that you showed earlier on, it stimulates our physiology and our brain. From a physiological perspective, it gets our heart rate going, it gets our blood pressure going. And what it does in the brain, just like stimulant medications, stimulants kind of give a dopamine release in the brain that helps to focus the brain. So this is why we have a lot of kids and young people diagnosed with ADHD who are like, I vape nicotine because it helps me focus and concentrate. Well, that's because of the stimulant properties. What's interesting is a lot of kids and adults will say, well, I vape because it relaxes me. It helps take the edge off my stress and anxiety. Now, that is counterintuitive because typically stimulants make somebody more anxious, but it's the dopamine release. It's the addictive cycle of this, the nicotine, and especially vaping it directly hits the brain very quickly, and it gives an immediate release of this neurochemical dopamine. And dopamine feels good, and dopamine can temporarily it chills us out, it relaxes us. So that's where that initial sense comes from for people of, oh, this takes the edge off, I feel relaxed. Here's the problem. Is that doesn't last. And so what happens on the other side, you sort of have this dopamine rush, and then you come down from that. And now you are feeling more agitated, more anxious, more unsettled, than you were before. And so it becomes this vicious cycle of chasing that dopamine rush, that neurochemical release to feel more relaxed. And that over time is what gets kids into this sort of constant use cycle of, every hour they're heading out to the bathroom to vape, or they're needing to vape to keep their neurochemistry, to keep that dopamine going so that they can feel relaxed. But that has real consequences for brain function and neurochemistry in both the short and the long term. And what we know over time is that vaping nicotine leads to more problems with depression and low mood, more problems with anxiety, more problems with focus and attention. And there comes a point where you simply can't take in any more nicotine to solve the problem. You've maxed out, your brain receptors have maxed out. There's no more that you can put in there that's going to solve it. And then people are in a real bind because they can't stop the vaping of the nicotine, but it's also not helping them the way that it was. And so this is the cycle that people get into.
Right. And then they end up going to THC. I mean, the numbers show now that kids who vape nicotine are more likely to start vaping THC, and many are dual users. There's so many questions that are coming in, and it's so hard to answer them all. Yeah. I just want to say, if anyone has any questions at the end that we have not answered, please email us at info@parentsagainst.vaping.org, and we will get into that. We only have about 15 minutes left, and you've answered some of these next questions, but I really want to get into the cessation, because I think that's really what parents are really concerned about. So now you have a young kid, and again, we're hearing about kids as young as 10, 11, 12 who are starting to vape. Your kid is addicted. What do you do? And I'm going to kind of skip through, I'll let you talk, but I'm going to kind of skip through a few of these questions. How do I know if my child is vaping? We can answer this kind of quickly. We do have these signs actually, which I can leave up while you're talking. But I think it's also, we really want to get to, there were a couple of questions that came up, and they all have to deal with cessation.
I do want to address this though, because I think this is a missed opportunity with a lot of kids and families to catch this earlier.
Exactly.
And first of all, as a parent, you've got to be aware that your child is seeing this and being exposed to this. And this issue cuts across every demographic. It doesn't matter what kind of community you live in, what kind of school you send your kids to, what socioeconomic status you are. Children and youth across the board are being exposed to this. And so being aware of that is so critical, because you can watch for these signs. When I have kids coming into the clinic who parents are going, there's been sort of a sudden change, and I'm not sure what's going on. And kids are having all these weird symptoms. And the first question I ask when I get the child apart from their parent is, let's talk about what's really going on. And I delve into what they've been exposed to, what they know, what they're using. And 9 times out of 10, that there is a substance that they're using that has led to this. So parents being aware that this can be going on. And quite frankly, these signs are important for people to look at, and looking at what your kids have with them. What's so interesting to me is kids and teens will say to me all the time, yeah, I've been carrying my vape pen, my stuff around all the time. It's in my room, it's in my nightstand, it's in my backpack, and nobody ever looks and nobody knows.
Right.
I'm not suggesting that we follow our kids around and intrude on every aspect of their life. But the reality of it is, while it is much easier to hide than smoking an actual cigarette, the signs are there, the devices are there, the paraphernalia is there. We need to open our eyes to that and realize it could be my kid just as likely as it could be your kid or anyone else's kid, and just stay aware of it. Because the sooner we can know that it's going on, the sooner we can help kids to get their way out of it.
Right. So I think you answered this a little earlier about everyone is vaping. You talked about peer pressure. You also talked about talking to your kids early. Yeah. And so I think we can move on from that, just because there are so many.
Give your kids give them specific words though. I think one of the mistakes we make, whether we're talking about, peer pressure with anything is we don't give them specific things that they can say.
Yeah.
So give them specific things. No, I'm not into that. Or, oh, my mom would kill me if she found out I was doing that. Like, give them specific things that they can say in the moment. That makes a big difference.
Right. We've said things like, I'm an athlete. I really can't. Although lots of athletes, again, lots of
That's
athletes.
the problem.
That type of kid, but no, I'm an athlete. Or my mom nicotine tests me. Even if the mom doesn't, you can use that as an excuse if you're at a party and say, I'll lose my car. Or
exactly.
That's exactly right. And I think every family has to come up with, even if it's a code word, if they're in a bad situation and you text a code word, I think it's really important to have those conversations.
That's
Thank you for answering that. Now, if your child has already started vaping, I'm going to go through a few of them and you can kind of combine all these questions because many of them, there's one.
And I think we can talk about several of like this whole general topic of what do you do when you've discovered either your child has come to you or you've discovered that your child is vaping. The first thing that's critically important is that you pause and take however much time you need to manage your own feelings about the issue. What is not helpful or effective is launching into a lecture, accusations, and look, our feelings might take us in that direction, right? But we need to step back from it, take some deep breaths, maybe even take the night or the week or whatever, talk with, if we're co-parenting, with a partner or the child's other parent, like let's get ourselves together as the adults, manage our feelings around it and get a game plan together of how we're going to approach the child. That is going to go a much longer way to addressing the situation than freaking out about it. Okay. So regulate yourself first and then sit down with your child and have a conversation out of curiosity, not blame and shame. And be honest. Hey, I found these things in your backpack. I want to understand what's going on. Let's talk about this. Or so-and-so's mom told me that, she saw you outside the track field or whatever, or the school called, or whatever it might be, to calmly and clearly say what information you have, but approach it from a stance of support and curiosity. Wow, I'm sure this has gotten away from you. This has probably been really stressful and tricky for you to navigate. And I just want to understand what's going on. And we're going to make a plan for how we can support you. That's how you open that conversation. And then it goes from there around the, what are we going to do about this now? But how you open that conversation and coming at it from a stance of, I've got myself together around this, and we're going to focus on this from an empathy and problem solving perspective, because when we come at it with blame and shame, it's going to turn into a power struggle, an argument. Kids are much more likely then to be defensive, to hide information, to not be open to help around it. So I think how we approach that is so critical. And then not allowing it to be an option to just ignore it. We don't just have this conversation and the kid says, okay, I'm gonna stop, I promise. And then, we never talk about it again. No, this is an ongoing. So my daughter vapes, so she denies it. What do I say? Right. This is what I know is happening. We're going to keep working together. You don't have to like it. But here's what I'm going to do as your parent. And remember, especially as kids get older, especially into the young adult years, we actually as parents cannot control what they do. We can't at any point in our kids' development, right? It's an illusion that we can control what they do. But what we can do is set clear boundaries for ourselves and our behavior, what we are willing to support, how we are going to proceed. So if it's a young adult who's vaping but denying it, you say, well, I'm going to go to this support group to get more information. Here's how I'm going to structure things in the house. Here's, I'm going to put, a testing requirement in place, whatever it is, looking at what boundaries do you as the parent need and want to set, knowing that you actually cannot control what the child does. All you can control is what you're going to do on your side of it and continuing to provide support and options for them.
That's great. So now you've had the conversations, you've come up with a plan for your child, or your child's trying to quit. We hear about kids who try to quit on their own all the time, and it's so hard. But, there are strategies, but there are also, there are some medical interventions that can be used, which pediatricians are using now. So, and then just strategies. And I'd love to hear what you found more, and everyone is different, and some people respond more to one than another, but what are you seeing in your practice, at least?
Yeah, I think what's important to recognize is that this is not something that kids can do themselves. And there's a certain percentage of kids that we see in practice who really want to be able to, right? No, I can do it. I'm tough. I'll tough it out. I'll do it. I've never seen that be successful. It's not for addiction in general. We need to be in supportive relationship with other people around these things, because there was discomfort, pain, challenges that drove them to start this in the first place. The intense discomfort of trying to stop is so much greater than the initial pain and discomfort that drove them to it, that it's just not really possible for kids and young people to do this on their own. So we can acknowledge that they want to. Wow, I really admire that, your strength in that, you wanting to tackle that. Here's what we know about that. And so we're going to put a plan in place to help you. Here's what I'm going to do as your mom or dad. Here's how your therapist is going to be involved, and really build a team around that. What I find is that kids need education around what the withdrawal process is like. That's important, because when they understand the general progression of how they're going to feel, the first 24 hours, how they're going to feel the first several days, how they're going to feel a week out, when they can see a light at the end of the tunnel and understand how that's going to impact them, that knowledge is empowering. And so making sure that they understand that.
I think that's really important, because they're kids, they've never dealt with addiction. And just because of the way they're wired, they will go towards what's pleasurable. So if they have to deal with this, and if they're not informed or aware that it's that this withdrawal period is so intense, you hear about kids punching walls, who are just so, like, already they're impulsive and they can't control their moods and their emotions. They're teenagers, and then you add these chemicals in, and it's really scary sometimes. And it's scary for parents to witness their children having these explosive outbursts and dealing with this pain. But it's scary for children, because children just don't know what's happening to them. So I think that conversation, if you're able to help your child, that conversation is so important to begin the process. Now, once you're in the process, what do you recommend? Again, cessation programs. That's one of the one thing I would say, the most common thing that people email us about. How do I help my child quit vaping? And do you know any place I can send them? Because some of them are so addictive.
Yes.
So
yes, there is a subsection of kids who really do benefit from some type of specific inpatient type of treatment. Generally, those are kids with a lot of co-occurring issues going on. Maybe kids who have other substance use issues, or have a history of more significant behavioral or mental health things. And yes, there are some programs for that. But honestly, a lot of times, when parents say, I just want to know where to send them, that's exactly one of the problems. Is there are family dynamics, there are relational issues going on here that need to be addressed, because the things that are driving kids from an emotional, social, mental health standpoint to vape and to use substances are all part of that emotional relational mix. And that includes family stuff. You can't just send your kids somewhere for any type of addictive behavior. There has to be full family work around that. And so that's important to understand. I think there are substance use programs in general that have been applied to vaping, that the general principles of that work, we're seeing more come out, especially now leveraging apps and technology specifically related to vaping that can provide parents and kids with tools, resources, strategies to help them. I think what I'll talk about too, because this doesn't get enough focus in my opinion, is when kids are trying to overcome any type of behavioral or substance addiction, we need to be intentional about putting a lot of positive health and mental health behaviors into their life. That means making sure that they're getting good sleep at night, making sure that they're eating nutrient-dense diets, making sure that they're having opportunities to move their body, that we are teaching them healthy coping strategies, that we're addressing areas of their life where they're feeling out of control or overwhelmed. Those are all, in my opinion, some of the most important parts of cessation programs. Yep. Yes, it's valuable to have them go through an app or something specific to vaping, but this is a 360, issue that we need to be looking at. How do we help them develop the lifestyle habits, the behaviors? How do we support them in all aspects of their life and wellness in a way that strengthens their minds and their bodies to help them overcome this addiction? And that is key.
Right. That's so important. I think, you hear about good food and exercise also affects the dopamine in the brain. Right. And also affects your mood. Some of these apps, for instance, the Truth Initiative app or others will say, if you have a craving, go for a walk, right. Go outside, change your environment. Let's talk about NRTs, nicotine replacement therapy, though. NRTs are commonly used to help adult smokers quit smoking. Pediatricians have been prescribing them for several years now to help kids quit vaping because it's a replacement for the nicotine that they are addicted to. But there are very special ways to use it, and it doesn't work for everyone. And quite frankly, if you have a 10 or 11-year-old, and again, I'm not recommending anything. You have to talk to a pediatrician about this because, again, every child has different health situation. But if you could just talk about that, I think people really want to hear about that.
In my experience, this is used in the most extreme cases where other interventions have been attempted, or where the frequency and dosing intensity of nicotine is so significant, or when the child is on other types of medications that are interacting poorly with the nicotine they're vaping, and we need to step them down carefully. Seizures are a great example of that. Kids with seizure disorders who maybe now have gotten hooked on nicotine, that's problematic because the vaping of the nicotine can worsen the seizures. But the problem too can happen where now they've gotten so acclimated to the nicotine in their system that withdrawal can throw them into seizures. And so we need to do that in a medically careful step down way. So those would be some of the times to use the nicotine replacement. In general, though, what we find is that that is not a standard part of what's needed to help kids come off of vaping.
Right. So you mentioned the seizures, and that's something that we've had a lot of back and forth about, a lot of questions. And, many kids do have seizure disorders. Yes. However, we talked about the nicotine levels in these products and how high they are and how unregulated they are. And the kid is sucking on it all day long. Right. And we know kids whose doctors have said that their seizures have been caused by this extreme nicotine to the brain.
That's right. Well, and here's what's important to know about that too. A lot of people are not aware that the most common time during the lifespan for seizures to develop is adolescence, because the brain is going through such a rapid period of change and the body's going through such a rapid period of change hormonally, that the adolescent years are the most common period of time for seizures to happen and for seizure disorders to develop. You combine that then, a teen who already has a lower threshold for seizures and who is in that adolescent, developmental period, you combine that with the nicotine exposure, and certainly that can become more of a problem. And we have seen several cases over the last few years where kids are out of nowhere having these sudden various types of seizures, either, small seizures called absent seizures or grand mals, and nobody can really figure out what's going on. And in the end, when we finally get, the truth out of, the kid about what's happening, it turns out that started on the heels of, nicotine use, vaping, that kind of thing. So again, it's just, if your child is starting to experience any abnormal medical type symptoms, physical symptoms that are not explained by anything else, this is something to have on your radar.
Yeah. No, I think that's really important. Just one last thing about the nicotine replacement therapy, and what you said about kind of a last resort. I think that when you have kids who have tried everything,
yes,
and these apps are amazing, but if you have a true physical addiction,
yes,
you do need something. My own son, who was very open about when he was vaping years ago, it took him easily 10 times to stop, and he needed that. He needed the patch. He stepped it down, but the gum for the cravings. And you know what, he was able, and the app was so great because it said, okay, now reminder. And he would set his own reminders. So kids are technologically savvy. But sometimes, again, you need to talk to your doctor, because sometimes that is really what they need, or other medication. And again, it's you have to help your child quit with the help of a doctor. Now, not everyone today can afford a psychologist or a psychiatrist, and in light of this youth mental health issue, situation, there just aren't enough, because everyone is in such pain. I know we're over, and I think we can wrap this up.
I just want to comment one thing about that, because something that a lot of people aren't aware of, and I didn't mention, in my introduction about myself, I also have a master's of science degree in nutrition. And so I use a lot of nutrition and integrative medicine, strategies in my psychological work with kids and adults. One of the things we've known for a long time in addiction medicine is that specific nutrients, specifically amino acids, which are in proteins, specifically B vitamins, omega-3 fatty acids, these play a really important role in supporting the brain during the withdrawal process, as well as strengthening the brain after you stop. And especially with children, these nutrients can be really, really important because they still have growing, developing brains. So I just think it's good for people to be aware of that, these are also options. These are things to ask your healthcare providers about. These are things that we have research on, and there are so many possibilities of how to safely and more comfortably give kids and young people tools for not only coming off of these things, but also making it less likely that they will, just end up using again in the future. So that's the silver lining, and the good news is that there's more and more options to get help.
I love that. I mean, I think as someone who's interested in nutrition, I've always known that those things are good for you. I've never made the connection between the brain and vaping and addiction. I love that. I really think that that's something we should also be, because that's easy.
That's right.
Give fish oil to their kids, B vitamins, protein, and that is so easy. And I think everyone can access that. So I think that's a great suggestion. Thank you for that. And then, we did talk about the apps. I think these are just a few of the apps that are available. I think, depending on what state you're in, I know the state of Michigan has wonderful resources on the Department of Health website, and Truth Initiative, one of our partners, has this is Quitting app. Now, this is for kids to sign up, but they also have a companion program for parents. So I personally.
Yours is great. I highly recommend, even for parents, even if you're like, I'm not going to be able to get my kid to use this, go to Truth Initiative. It'll help you to just get a better handle on the issues, to educate yourself so that you can be a better resource for your child. I highly recommend them.
I think that's great. And then advocate. I mean, I think you have to advocate for your child. And, if you're concerned about what the school is doing, go to your school, ask your school what they're doing, call your local health department, call your friends. You can talk to anyone about you just have to start talking. And, we give educational presentations to schools and to communities. I know you have an amazing website and resources on your website, which I will get to now right here. So there are lots of resources there, but I think parents are just desperate for help. So I think you really have to be able to, you have to know where to look, but I think the information is out there. And again, you can reach out to us on social media, any of the participants. If you have any questions, reach out to Dr. Beurkens also on, Facebook, Instagram. You have a really vibrant community there. We also have a parent support group on our Facebook page. I'm going to post this webinar there so that those parents can access that, but I'm going to leave that up just for a second so people can scan and go to that.
And I think really for people to just realize, you're not alone.
Absolutely.
Kids often feel very alone, like I'm the only one dealing with this. Parents feel that way. I'm the only one dealing with this. There's so much guilt and shame for us as parents when our kids are engaging in these kinds of behaviors or struggling. And what I know from 25 years plus now of working with families, you feel alone, but you are absolutely not alone. There are millions of other parents and kids who either have gone through, are going through, or will go through this. And so to just look for connection for yourself around this, and don't allow your own guilt and shame around these things prevent you from getting support for yourself, from getting support for your kids. We are all in this together. There are so many things that make raising kids today so much harder than any generation of parents previously. And, vaping is one of many issues, right? And so we just need to give ourselves and each other a lot of grace around that. We're all doing the best that we can at this moment in time with what we know and the resources we have, but just know you are not alone. There are supports, there are people who understand exactly what you're going through. And I think just the sense of not feeling alone in itself is one of the most therapeutic things for kids and for parents and all this. So
yeah, no, I agree. And that's what people have said to us. If I'd known you existed, I wouldn't have felt so alone and so ashamed. And kids too, with social media, there are some really awful things that are going on social media, but there are some good things too. And there are communities, and you can reach out to communities. Kids very often will come together and say, okay, guys, we got to quit this. Let's do it together. And they'll support each other. And we've heard about lots of groups of kids, sports teams, kids in school, just friend groups who will do that. And I think that's a really great resource. Maybe say to your child who's vaping, well, hey, if you're feeling this way, some of your friends are probably feeling that way too. Maybe you guys can do it together. I think that's really a really good point, Dr. Beurkens. So I'm just going to scan through. This is our final page. If you want to join us, if you want to become a volunteer, if you want to get more information, please scan this, give us some feedback. And again, this webinar will be, we're going to send this out to everyone who signed up. I know people are dropping off because it's the witching hour, dinner, homework, all the whole thing, all of that. But you can catch, you can catch the end that you missed when we send it out. And, if you have anything you want to put in our email, we'll add all of your information. And thank you everyone for joining us. And Dr. Beurkens, thank you so much to you for all of your wisdom and advice. And I mean, I've been doing this not as long as you have, but for me, I've been doing, and I've learned so much even just in this past hour. So thank you very much.
Thank you for having me. This was great. Thank you for all the important work you're doing.
Thank you. So see you all in the next time.
Take care, everybody.
Bye.